Symon Petliura, Symon Vasylyovych Petliura, Ukrainian, Symon Vasylyovych Petliura, 22 May OS 10 May 1879 May 25, 1926, was a Ukrainian politician and journalist. He became the supreme commander of the Ukrainian Army and the president of the Ukrainian People's Republic during Ukraine's short-lived sovereignty in 1918–1921, leading Ukraine's struggle for independence following the fall of the Russian Empire in 1917. Career to 1917. Born on 22 May OS 10 May 1879 in a suburb of Poltava, then part of the Russian Empire, Symon Petliura was the son of Vasyl Pavlovich Petliura and Olha Oleksievna Nemarchenko, of Cossack background. His father, a Poltava city resident, had owned a transportation business. His mother was a daughter of an Orthodox Hieroman priest monk. Petliura obtained his initial education in parochial schools and planned to become an Orthodox priest. Petliura studied in the Russian Orthodox Seminary in Poltava from 1895 to 1901. While there, he joined the Hromada Society in 1898. When his membership in Hromada was discovered in 1901, he was expelled from the seminary. In 1900, Petliura joined the revolutionary Ukrainian party RUP. In 1902, under threat of arrest, he moved to Yekaterinodar in the Cuban, where he worked for 2 years, initially as a schoolteacher and later as an archivist for the Cuban Cossack host, helping to organize over 200,000 documents. In December 1903, he was arrested for organizing a RUP branch in Yekaterinodar and for publishing inflammatory anti-Tsarist articles in the Ukrainian press outside of Imperial Russia in Austrian Kent. Released on bail in March 1904, he moved briefly to Kiev and then emigrated to the western Ukrainian city of Lviv, then officially called Lemberg, in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. In Lviv, Petliura lived under the name of Svyatoslav Tagon, working alongside Ivan Franko and Volodymyr H. Natik as an editor for the journal Literaturno Naukovy Vestnik Literary Scientific Herald, the Shevchenko Scientific Society, and as a co-editor of Volya newspaper. He also contributed numerous articles to the Ukrainian language press in Galicia. At the end of 1905, after a nationwide amnesty was declared by the authorities, Petliura returned briefly to Kiev, but soon moved to the Russian capital of Petersburg in order to publish the socialist democratic monthly magazine Vilna Ukraina Free Ukraine, along with Prokop Poniatko and Mykola Porsh. After Russian censors closed this magazine in July 1905, he moved back to Kiev, where he worked for the newspaper Rada the Council. In 1907–9, he became the editor of the literary magazine Slovo-Ukrainian, Slovo, the word, and co-editor of Ukraina Ukrainian, Ukraina, Ukraine. Because of the closure of these publications by the Russian imperial authorities, Petliura had once again to move from Kiev. He went to Moscow in 1909, where he worked briefly as an accountant. There in 1910 he married Olga Bilska (1885–1959), with whom he had a daughter, Lizzie, in 1911–1942. From 1912 until May 1917 he served as a co-editor of the influential Russian-language journal Ukrainskaya Zhizn Ukrainian Life. Journalism and publications. As the editor of numerous journals and newspapers, Petliura published over 15,000 critical articles, reviews, stories, and poems under an estimated 120 nom de plumes. His prolific work in both the Russian and Ukrainian languages helped shape the mindset of the Ukrainian population in the years leading up to the revolution in both eastern and western Ukraine. His prolific correspondence was of great benefit when the revolution broke out in 1917, as he had contacts throughout Ukraine. Publications before 1914. As the Ukrainian language had been outlawed in the Russian Empire by the Im's ukaz of 1876, Petliura found more freedom to publish Ukraine-oriented articles in St. Petersburg than in Ukraine. There, he published the magazine Vilna Ukraina Ukrainian, Vilna Ukraina, independent Ukraine until July 1905. Tsarist censors, however, closed this magazine and Petliura moved back to Kiev. In Kiev, Petliura first worked for Rada. In 1907, he became editor of the literary magazine Slovo. Also, he co-edited the magazine Ukraina. In 1909, these publications were closed by Russian Imperial Police, and Petliura moved back to Moscow to publish. There, he was co-editor of the Russian-language journal Ukrainskaya Zhizn to familiarize the local population with news and culture of what was known as Malorussia. He was chief editor with this publication from 1912 to 1914. In Moscow, he married his wife Olga Bilsko in 1915. Later, she was also known as her husband under the surname of Marchenko. There, in Moscow, was born the daughter of Petliura, Lizia Olija. Publications after emigration. In Paris, Petliura continued the struggle for Ukrainian independence as a publicist. In 1924, Petliura became the editor and publisher of the weekly journal Trizub Trident. He contributed to this journal using various pen names, including V. Marchenko and V. Salsky. Revolution in Ukraine. Rise to power. In May 1917, Petliura attended the first All-Ukrainian Congress of Soldier Deputies held in Kiev as a delegate. On May 18, he was elected head of the Ukrainian General Military Committee, the ultimate progenitor of the modern Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. With the proclamation of the Central Council of Ukraine on June 28, 1917, Petliura became the first Secretary Minister for Military Affairs. Disagreeing with the politics of the then chairman of the General Secretary, Volodymyr Vinnichenko, Petliura left the government and became the head of the Haidamaka Kish, a military formation of Sloboda Ukraine in Kharkiv. In January-February 1918, the Haidamaka Kish was forced back to protect Kiev during the uprising at the Kiev Arsenal plant and to prevent the capture of the capital by the Bolshevik Red Guard. After the Hetmanate Putsch April 28, 1918, the Skoropadsky administration arrested Petliura and incarcerated him for 4 months in Bila Tserkva. After his release, Petliura participated in the anti-Hetmanate Putsch of November 1918 and became a member of the Directorate of Ukraine as the chief of military forces. Following the fall of Kiev February 1919 and the emigration of Vinnichenko from Ukraine, Petliura became the leader of the Directorate on 11 February 1919. In his capacity as head of the army and state, he continued to fight both Bolshevik and white forces in Ukraine for the next 10 months. 1919. With the outbreak of hostilities between Ukraine and Soviet Russia in January 1919, and with Vinnichenko's emigration, Petliura ultimately became the leading figure in the Directorate. During the winter of 1919, the Petliura army lost most of Ukraine, including Kiev, to Bolsheviks, and by March 6 relocated to Podolia. In the spring of 1919, he managed to extinguish a coup d'état led by Volodymyr Oskilko, who saw Petliura cooperating with socialists such as Boris Martos. During the course of the year, Petliura continued to defend the fledgling republic against incursions by the Bolsheviks, Anton Denikin's White Russians, and the Romanian Polish troops. By autumn of 1919, most of Denikin's White Russian forces were defeated. In the meantime, however, the Bolsheviks had grown to become the dominant force in Ukraine. 1920. Petliura withdrew to Poland December 5, 1919, which had previously recognized him as the head of the legal government of Ukraine. In April 1920, as head of the Ukrainian People's Republic, he signed an alliance in Warsaw with the Polish government, agreeing to a border on the river Zbruch and recognizing Poland's right to Galicia in exchange for military aid in overthrowing the Bolshevik regime. Polish forces, reinforced by Petliura's remaining troops, some 2 divisions, attacked Kiev on May 7, 1920 in what became a turning point of the 1919-21 Polish-Bolshevik War. Following initial successes, Pilsudski's and Petliura's forces were pushed back to the Vistula River and the Polish capital, Warsaw. The Polish army defeated the Bolshevik Russians in the end, but the Red Army was never cleared from all of Ukraine, and therefore Ukrainians were unable to secure independence. Petliura directed the affairs of the Ukrainian government in exile from Tarnow. After the revolution, Bolshevik Russia persistently demanded that Petliura be handed over. Protected by several Polish friends and colleagues, such as Henryk Joski with the establishment of the Soviet Union, on December 30, 1922, Petliura, in late 1923, left Poland for Budapest, then Vienna, Geneva, and finally settled in Paris in early 1924. Here he established and edited the Ukrainian-language newspaper Tryzub, promoting a Ukrainian cultural identity. During his time as leader of the Directorate, Petliura was active in supporting Ukrainian culture both in Ukraine and in the Ukrainian diaspora. Supporting culture in Ukraine, Petliura introduced the awarding of the title People's Artist of Ukraine to artists who had made significant contributions to Ukrainian culture. A similar titled award was continued after a significant break under the Soviet regime. Among those who had received this award was blind kobza player Ivan Kuchurenko. Promoting Ukrainian culture abroad, he also saw the value in gaining international support and recognition of Ukrainian arts through cultural exchanges. Most notably, Petliura actively supported the work of cultural leaders such as the choreographer Vasyl Avramko, conductor Oleksandr Koshets, and banjoist Vasyl Yemets, to allow them to travel internationally and promote an awareness of Ukrainian culture. Koshets created the Ukrainian Republic Kapela and took it on tour internationally, giving concerts in Europe and the Americas. One of the concerts by the Kapela inspired George Gershwin to write Summertime, based on the lullaby Oj Kadit Sun Kolovic, and all three musicians later emigrated to the United States. Life in exile, Paris. In Paris, Petliura directed the activities of the government of the Ukrainian National Republic in exile. He launched the weekly Tryzub and continued to edit and write numerous articles under various pen names with an emphasis on questions dealing with national oppression in Ukraine. These articles were written with a literary flair. The question of national awareness was often of significance in his literary work. Petliura's articles had a significant impact on the shaping of Ukrainian national awareness in the early 20th century. He published articles and brochures under a variety of noms de plume, including V. Marchenko, V. Salesky, I. Rikitsky, and O. Ryister. Role in pogroms. Petliura is considered a controversial figure connected with the pogroms of Jews during his rule of the Ukrainian National Republic. According to Peter Kennes, before the advent of Hitler, the greatest mass murder of Jews occurs in the Ukraine in the course of the Civil War. All participants in the conflict were guilty of murdering Jews, even the Bolsheviks. However, the volunteer army had the largest number of victims. The number of Jews killed during the period is estimated to be between 35,000 and 50,000. A total of 1,236 violent attacks on Jews had been recorded between 1918 and 1921 in Ukraine. Among them, 493 were carried out by Ukrainian People's Republic soldiers under the command of Symon Petliura, 307 by independent Ukrainian warlords, 213 by Denikin's army, 106 by the Red Army, and 32 by the Polish Army. The newly formed Ukrainian state Ukrainian People's Republic promised Jews full equality and autonomy. Arnold Margolin, a Jewish assistant minister in Petliura's UPR government, declared in May 1919 that the Ukrainian government had given Jews more rights than they enjoyed in any other European government. However, after 1918, Petliura gradually lost control over most of his military units, with some of the breakaway units getting involved in pogroms against Jews. During Petliura's term as head of state 1919-20, pogroms continued to be perpetrated on Ukrainian territory. Petliura's role in the pogroms has been a topic of dispute since his assassination in 1926 and the succeeding Schwarzbard's trial. In 1969, the Journal of Jewish Social Studies published two opposing views regarding Petliura's responsibility in pogroms against Jews during his reign over Ukraine by scholars Taras Hunksak and Zosia Sajkowski, which are still frequently cited. Later, the journal published letters from the two authors. It has been documented that Petliura actively sought to halt anti-Jewish violence on numerous occasions, introducing capital punishment for the crime of pogroming. Conversely, he is also accused of not having done enough to stop the pogroms and being afraid to punish officers and soldiers engaged in crimes against Jews for fear of losing their support. Assassination. On May 25, 1926, at 1412 by the Gibert bookstore, Petliura was walking on Rue Racine near Boulevard Saint-Michel of the Latin Quarter in Paris and was approached by Shalom Schwarzbard. Schwarzbard asked him in Ukrainian, "Are you Mr. Petliura?" Petliura did not answer but raised his walking cane. Then, as Schwarzbard claimed in court, he pulled out a gun and shot him 5 times. Schwarzbard was an anarchist of Jewish descent born in Ukraine. He participated in the Jewish self-defense of Balta in 1905. The Russian Tsarist government sentenced him to 3 months in prison for provoking the Balta pogrom. He was twice convicted of taking part in anarchist expropriation burglary and bank robbery in Austria-Hungary. He later joined the French Foreign Legion 1914–1917 and was wounded in the Battle of the Somme. It is reported that Schwarzbard told famous fellow anarchist leader Nestor Makhno in Paris that he was terminally ill and expected to die, and that he would take Petliura with him. Makhno forbade Schwarzbard to do so. According to a defected KGB operative Peter Deriabin, Schwarzbard was a Soviet NKVD agent and acted on the order from a former chairman of the Soviet Ukrainian government and current Soviet ambassador to France, Christian Rakovsky. The special operation of the GPU was consolidated by GPU agent Mikhail Volodin, who arrived in France August 8, 1925, and who had been in close contact with Schwarzbard. Schwarzbard's parents were among 15 members of his family murdered in the pogroms in Odessa. The core defense at the Schwarzbard trial was as presented by the noted jurist Henry Taras, that he was avenging the deaths of more than 50,000 Jewish victims of the pogroms, whereas the prosecution, both criminal and civil, tried to show that Petliura was not responsible for the pogroms and that Schwarzbard was a Soviet agent. After a trial lasting 8 days, the jury acquitted Schwarzbard. Petliura was buried alongside his wife and daughter in the Cimetière du Montparnasse in Paris, France. Petliura's 2 sisters, Orthodox nuns who had remained in Poltava, were arrested and shot in 1928 by the NKVD, the Soviet secret police. It is claimed that, in March 1926, Vlas Chubar, chairman of the Council of People's Commissars of the Ukraine, in a speech given in Kharkiv and repeated in Moscow, warned of the danger Petliura represented to Soviet power. It was after this speech that the command had allegedly been given to assassinate Petliura. Legacy. Ukraine. Ukrainian diaspora. For part of the Western Ukrainian diaspora, Petliura is remembered as a national hero, a fighter for Ukrainian independence, a martyr who inspired hundreds of thousands to fight for an independent Ukrainian state. He has inspired original music and youth organizations. Petliura in Ukrainian folk songs. During the revolution, Petliura became the subject of numerous folk songs, primarily as a hero calling for his people to unite against foreign oppression. His name became synonymous with the call for freedom. 15 songs were recorded by the ethnographer Reverend Prof. K. Danailsky. In the songs, Petliura is depicted as a soldier, in a manner similar to Robin Hood mocking Skoropadsky and the Bolshevik Red Guard. News of Petliura's assassination in the summer of 1926 was marked by numerous revolts in eastern Ukraine, particularly in Boromlia, Chehalivtsi, Sumy Province, Velika Rublivka, Miloradov, Poltava Province, Achnilsk, Bilsk, Kuzmin, and all along the Vorskla River, from Oktyabrsky to Poltava. These revolts were brutally pacified by the Soviet administration. The blind Kobzars Pavlo Hashchenko and Ivan Kuchurenko composed a Duma epic poem in memory of Symon Petliura. To date, Petliura is the only modern Ukrainian politician to have a Duma created and sung in his memory. This Duma became popular among the Kobzars of left bank Ukraine and was sung also by Stepan Pasyuha, Petro Drevchenko, Bohashchenko, and Chumek. The Soviets also tried their hand at portraying Petliura through the arts in order to discredit the Ukrainian national leader. A number of humorous songs appeared in which Petliura is portrayed as a traveling beggar whose only territory is that which is under his train carriage. A number of plays, such as The Republic on Wheels by Yakov Mamontov and the opera Assassination by Boris Lyatoshinsky and Arsenal by Georgy Mayboroda, portray Petliura in a negative light, as a lackey who sold out western Ukraine to Poland, often using the very same melodies which had become popular during the fight for Ukrainian independence in 1918. Petliura continues to be portrayed by the Ukrainian people in its folk songs in a manner similar to Taras Shevchenko and Bohdan Khmelnytsky. He is likened to the sun which suddenly stopped shining.